Well, shalom, shalom, shalom. Welcome again, everybody, to another video. I'm your brother here, Ezra ben Khazar, the Hebrew, and we're back. I know it's been a minute. I pray that you've been blessed. I pray that the Most High has been keeping you in these trying days, with these daily trials and tribulations. But we overcome through the grace of the Messiah, through the grace of our Adonai, the God of Abraham, Yishak, and Yaakov, the God of Israel. Now, today I come to you with a video talking about the Karaim. But first, I want to explain where I've been. I stepped back to do more research so I can understand the Khazarian history more, so I can understand Khazarian Judaism more. I also wanted to do more DNA and genetic tests to fully get more evidence and solidify the Khazarian lineage within my family. I've also done more family genealogical research and family trees, and now I understand where the heritage comes from. And as we do more videos, I will be sharing that with you guys. I'm not shy about it, so I'll share, because I also want to find other members of the family so that maybe we can make a project or something like that. Who knows? But anyway, today's video is on the Karaim. We will also talk about the Sabbatniks, but that'll come a little later. So today, the Karaim are also known as the Crimean Karaites. But there's a difference between Karaim and Karaites. So we will try our best to explain these differences as the video goes on. So in the Karaim language, they are called Karalar. And their own language comes from the Kipchak-Kuman family of Turkic languages in the Ponto-Caspian family. And what I think is interesting is the Caspian Sea is actually called the Khazar Sea. So in a sense, their language is a part of the Ponto-Khazar language group. Now this is important because the Karaim see themselves as descendants of the Khazars. And I believe them, from based off my research and the things I've looked into. I believe them. I know there's a lot of scholars who believe that they're not descendants from Khazars. But see, from my perspective, and maybe it's because of my own lineage, I can see how being mixed is that you could be mixed. You can have the haplotype of a Middle Eastern person, but have autosomes from a Turk, or vice versa. So Karaim, from what I've learned, means Karaite-like. And Karai means the readers. Now, what's interesting is I've read in my research that the Khazars used to be illiterate. That they used to be illiterate in a sense until they converted into Judaism and started to learn more of reading. So being called the Karai, or the readers, makes sense to their religiosity. So this also explains why we get conflicting testimonies on Khazars being Karaites, or rabbinical, or a pre-exilic Israelite religion. Essentially, they were Hebrews that composed a variety of converts or gerim. For example, you would have certain Ger Zedekim in the rabbinite position, like the house of Bulan. And you would have many Ger Toshavim in the Khaganate who took on many obligations of Judaism, but might not have completed the complete rabbinical conversion. You also had many Proto-Karaites in the Khazarian kingdom, and some chose to go in that direction. That's somewhat of the group we're talking about here. But first, I want to talk about the rabbinical ones. They became what we would call the Krymchaks. aka the Crimean Jews. They were strict rabbinical Pharisees, Pharisee Karaim in a sense, or Khazars, and they learned from Pharisee rabbinical Jews like Yitzhak Hasangari and many of the Byzantine Romanio Jews. And many of these Jews were targeted in the Holocaust, so it's hard to piece together their history. But what do we know about the Krymchaks? They have historically lived close to the Karaim. Krymchak was used to differentiate them from the other rabbinical Jews such as Ashkenazi, Georgian. It's another word for Crimean Jews, basically. But they were also called Sharel Balalari, or children of Israel. They lived in Zulufli, Kuflatar. Sorry if I said that wrong. But they were called Zulufi Kuflatar, Jews with payot. And that distinguished them from the Karaim, who were called Zulufis Kufutlar, Jews without payot. Payot are the side curls. The Krymchak language is a type of Jewish patois, an ethnolect of Crimean Tatar, which is a Kipchak language, and is used interchangeably with Hebrew. It contains numerous Hebrew and Aramaic loan words and was written in Hebrew characters, but now it is written in a Cyrillic script. But after World War II, it's rare. The Krymchaks are likely a result of diverse origins. Ancestors included Sephardic Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, Jews from the Byzantine Empire, the Genoa Empire, the Gestafli family, Georgia, and Jewish refugees who settled in the Black Sea in the ancient times. As we know, Jewish communities existed in many parts of the Greek colonies in that region during the late classical period. They were called worshippers of the all-highest God, or God-fearers. Those are proto-Messianic Noahides. They're present in Crimea and the Black Sea as early as the 1st century. At that time, Crimea was occupied by the Goths, the Huns, the Bulgars, and we know later the Khazars and other peoples. The Jewish merchants, such as the Radhanites, began to develop their extensive contacts in the Pontic region, and they maintained close relations with the Proto-Krymchaks. The Khazar dominance of Crimea in the early Middle Ages is what boosted the Krymchak population when many of the Khazars became Rabbinites. The Geonese occupation of southern Crimea, post-Khazaria, saw rising degrees of Jewish settlement. Many people who composed of this Jewish settlement were Crimean Karaite merchants, or shall I say Karaite merchants from the Middle East. Interesting thing is I actually do Khazarian DNA with a family who has found out that they had this same Turkic Levantine DNA within them as well. They had Saltovo Mayaki DNA. So I linked up with this brother, and he does research on his family name. And what we've learned from his family name is that it's actually preserved as a Karaite family. His family had registered themselves as Karaites. But he has a Middle Eastern haplogroup. I think he's haplogroup J. But back to the rabbinical ones. They prayed according to the Sephardi rite, the Ashkenazi rite, and the Ramonio rite. In 1515, all of the traditions were united into distinctive Krymchak prayer book, which overall represented Ramonio rite by Rabbi Moshe HaGola, a chief rabbi of Kiev who had settled in Crimea. David ben Eliezer Leno in 1735 writes a monumental Hebrew historical chronicle called the Devar Sephatayim, the utterance of the mouth, and is a history on the Crimean Karaites. According to the anthropologist S. Weissenberg, the origin of the Krymchaks is lost in the darkness of the ages. Only one thing can be said, that they carry less Turkic blood than the Karaites, although certain kinship between both peoples and the Khazars can hardly be denied. The Russian Empire annexed Crimea in 1783 And unlike their Karaite neighbors, the Krymchaks suffered the full brunt of anti-Jewish restrictions. Intermarriage with the Ashkenazim reduced the numbers of the distinct Krymchak community. By the 1900s, there were 60,000 Ashkenazim and only 6,000 Krymchaks in Crimea. Mid-19th century, the Krymchaks became followers of Rabbi Chaim Hezekiah Medini, also known by the name of his work, the Sidi Hamed, a Sephardi rabbi born in Jerusalem who had come to Crimea from Istanbul. His followers accorded him the title of Gaon. Settling in Karasubazar, the largest Krymchak community in Crimea, Rabbi Medini spent his life raising their educational standards. Many Krymchaks was killed in the fighting between the Red Army and the White Movement. Many died in the famines in the early 1920s and in the early 1930s, and then many immigrated to Israel, the United States, and Turkey. And unlike the Crimean Karaites, the Krymchaks were targeted for annihilation by the Nazis. We'll talk about that. But almost 75% of their population were killed during the Holocaust, sadly. Before World War II, there were about 9,000 Krymchaks, but 6,000 of them perished. Only the men who fought on the front lines and those families who were evacuated avoided the fate. Upon the return of the Soviet authority in 1944, the Krymchaks found themselves forcibly deported to Central Asia, along with the Crimean Tatars as well. But Krymchaks now live in Germany, Israel, United States, and other countries. And in 1989, the Crimean Karaites Cultural Educational Society was created to revive this culture. By 2000, about 600 Krymchaks live in the former Soviet Union, half in Ukraine, the remainder in Georgia, Russia, and Uzbekistan. 600 to 700 Krymchaks still claim their identity in Israel and others in other places. They practice Orthodox Talmudic Judaism. Their prayer book was known as the Nusha Kafa. The traditional occupations were farming, trade, and viticulture, which we'll talk about the wine culture of the Khazars in a later video. Their dress and their customs resembled that of the Karaites and the Tatars. And with Russia taking Crimea in 2014, I've read of one Krymchak who preferred to move to Ukraine. The Karaim I know, the Karaim that I read about, stayed and preferred to live in Russia, if I'm not mistaken. So I want to talk about some of the differences between the Karaites, the non-mixed Jewish Karaites from Iraq and Egypt, and the Karaim, who are the Judeo-Khazars, who didn't go full Krymchak or Rabbinate, but chose the Karaite way instead. So let's talk about some differences between the Karaites from the Middle East and the Karaites from Crimea. So one aspect of the Kerala Karaites is that they profess a belief in Jesus and Muhammad as prophets. Warren Paul Green, a Holocaust researcher, had explained this. One aspect of the Russian Kerala Karaim was a recognition of the divinity of Jesus and Muhammad. In a pamphlet published by the Polish Karaite community in 1938, the topic of the relationship of Karaitism to Islam and Christianity was discussed. Karaites viewed Christ and Muhammad as prophets. And this is confirmed in a statement by Shariah Shapsal, the leader of the Karaites in Poland. In 1936, he declared, "Christ is for us a great prophet, but not the Messiah." This is very similar to what I've spoken of in the past videos, how the Mountain Jews in Dagestan, how in the Khazar Empire, there was tolerance. There wasn't really this beef between religions that we have now where they'd be like, oh, you can't be a Jew if you believe in Messiah and stuff like that. Or they studied all these books, The roots of the Karaim are the Khazar Empire. They claim all the history from Bulan and the Bulanid house of the Gerzadakim. And they also explain how the Khaganate had ran on the Messianic Noahide system of government that allowed people to practice their religions as long as the basic laws of Judaism were applied. These laws was common sense to the Khazars. When the Khaganate fell, the Khazar adherents of Judaism mainly stayed in Crimea, as they regarded it their homeland, holding refuge in truthful Calais. The Khazars, who I found out are my ancestors, they left for places like Transylvania and Hungary. So we'll talk about that later in another video. Under the Crimean Khanate, they worked for the Khan as treasurers, and they would mix with the Pechenegs, the Cumans, and the Krymchak Turks, which further impact their culture. They say it's about 2,000 Karaim that know their roots and speak the language. Many can't speak the Turkic Karaim language, but bringing this back can be a goal. It contains loanwords from Arabic, Hebrew, and Persian, which entered the language early in its history, and it added additional words from Russian, Ukrainian, and Polish. Many Karaims today study Turkology. This came when religious identification was being pushed to the back and ethnical identification became the norm. So Hakam Saraya Shabsal embraced the Khazar culture, and we'll go deeper into that later on in this video. Lithuanian Karaim made it to Lithuania from Crimea, found at the castle of Trakai. The Hakam tells how the Ashkenazim helped them understand their history further. They say now that they do not marry with Ashkenazim, or I assume rabbinical Jews is what they meant, but this may be recent. The Krymchaks were the ones who mainly married with Ashkenazim. During the Soviet times, however, there were a little bit of intermingling between the Karaim and Ukrainians. Now there are associations out that preserve Karaim culture, and some Karaim seem to preserve Turkic beliefs, such as had holy trees and sun disk, and so like a sort of synchronization. But let's say DNA-wise, since I'm one who knows about being mixed, you can be Turkic and Israel at the same time. You can have Turkic autosomes and have haplogroups going back to the Israelites and vice versa, as I mentioned earlier. Karaim live in Istanbul. They were brought by Mahmud the Conqueror to Karakoy to study Torah. Black here actually meaning Karaim. Istanbul Karaim were an extremely small population, and they made intermarriages, being small or assimilated into other Jewish communities, or they migrated. And after World War II, some moved to Poland, and some of them have made Aliyah. So I'll try to break down the history of the Karaim and the Krymchaks, the rabbinical and the Karaite Khazars, and hopefully it was clear and understandable. So now we'll move into another topic of the minhag and the custom of the Karaim. In 1892, Boguslav Furkowitz published a Russian translation of Hebrew prayers that were collected by Abraham Furkowitz. This book, which became the first collection of Karaim prayers translated into Russian, are mainly used by the Karaites. Karaites practice a quite Judaic sort of, as some would say, messianism, because sometimes they do the Lord's Prayer, and they respect the Judeo-Arabic origins of the Islamic Quran. So they have practices similar to Islam, like washing hands and feet before entering the Knesset and taking the shoes off with prostration. We have arts and Karaim folk songs and literature that were made by a man named Alexander Moskowitz, so I wanted to shout him out. And they also have prayers that mention Jerusalem, Mecca, and Medina, as I've heard. And as we mentioned in the last video, they have belief in or respect for Yeshua and Muhammad. Trained Hazans serve voluntarily. They do services and ceremonies all voluntarily because everyone is considered a leader and a worker. Selah. Some of the pro-Turkic Karaims say Shema Karaim instead of Shema Yisrael, which is very interesting as I watched in a documentary. The pro-Turkic Karaims sometimes use the term Tengri, such as some people saying Allah for God in the Arabic countries. Some of them use Tengri for the name of Hashem. And some Karaim abroad are more Turkic-centric than the Karaim in Israel, which makes sense, And they're mixed. So like I've said in the last video, you're mixed. You can take on whatever side you feel that you connect with. They had ketubas called bitiks, and one of their main slogans are all Israel are brethren, both Ezrak and Ger alike. So now I want to talk about Subotniks. Subotniks can be Russian Slavs, or they can be Karaims, old citizens of the Khazar Empire, no matter what origins. So this could include Israelite origins as well. But Karaim Noahides and God-fears that many of them became Krymchaks. An interesting fact about Subotniks is that they played a role in early settlement in Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel. A particular family is the Dubrovin family, who also have videos and documentaries about them. Today's Subotnik and Karaim that take on more Mishnah and Talmud than Karaites from the beginning of the 19th century are the Molokan, a type of East Slavic Subotnik. And they started professing a type of Messianic Judaism which didn't recognize the full authority of the Talmud, but was somewhat similar to the Karaites. So they became known as Ruski Karami. But nowadays, Subotniks that believe in Yeshua have now been marginalized. In 1917, however, the Karaite National Assembly of Eupatoria, headed by the Hakam Zariah Shapsal, allowed marriages between the Subotnik Karaites and other Karaites. And as I've read, this made Zariah Shapsal fall out of favor in Crimea. Even though they were racially non-Jews, many Subotniks were executed by Turkic Nazis during World War II. And I believe this is because if you practice some oral law, they aligned you with rabbinical Jews, and that's who the Nazis were catching up with. If they knew for a fact rabbinical Jews connected to ancient Israelites, and they were trying to find out the same about the Karaites. Sadly, some Karaites, to avoid being looked at as Jews, had to work with the Nazis as a closed construction or a labor battalion, like a slave force. But some Karaim, after they were deemed to not receive persecution, were registered Jews as Karaims to save their lives. So let's talk more about World War II and what happened with them. They already had said that they were mixed and that they were not pure Jews since before the Holocaust. But first, this didn't help them because the Nazis was hunting down anybody who had any type of Israelite ancestry, even if you had converted to official nationalistic Christianity, right? So shout out to Nehemiah Gordon and his research on this subject with using Warren Paul Green. I'm going to share some of these sources. It says that the efforts of the German Karaites came to fruition in January when Serge von Dolvan, leader of the German Karaite community, received a letter from these guys, right? And it said, and this is the Nazi decree. It says, concerning your submissions of the 5th of September and 10th October 1938, this is what they inform you, that the Karaite sect should not be considered Jewish religious community within the meaning of all this other stuff, right? Here, you can read it yourself. So Jews had took advantage of that, and they were able to be saved by being registered as Karaim. So those rabbinical Jews who had Karaim friends, they were able to register them together. Please read this article if you want to know more. It's a lot more interesting information caught up in this. But from a Black American perspective, the best way I could put it is that they were essentially passing. If you know what that is when a mixed black person, mixed white, mixed black and white in America could pass for white and get past persecution of being African American. It's something that went on in early America. We see that that's basically what was happening during World War II. They caught on to the fact that many Jews were escaping by saying that they were Karaites. And they made Hakim Shariah Shapsal make a list. So he had to save as many people as he can by writing them down in the list. There's a situation where Ukrainian Karaites were not able to make it. It was said that the Karaim had passed somewhere. I never heard the word before, but I realized that they must have been some sort of sect. Old men in loose garments reaching their heels. They had spent the night in their synagogues. In the morning they had come out chanting, "Children, we are going to our deaths. Prepare yourselves. Let us meet there bravely as Christ did." So as we see here that these Crimean Karaites lay down their lives just as the Messiah did, and that they were a sort of messianic Jews. They had a synagogue and they believed in Mashiach. And we know that this is a historical Israelite Turkic community. After World War II, the Furkoviches managed to keep the torch burning, as my brother wrote on the WikiNoah page, until 2009, when it was taken to Israel by the Central Spiritual Board for Russian Karaites abroad. And thanks to their campaigning, despite a hiatus on Subotnik immigration to Israel in 2004, the last Subotnik families were granted the right of Aliyah in 2014. So today they can be found in Russia, Azerbaijan, and Israel. Most of the Karaites today have been absorbed into the Karaite movement, the main Karaite religious movement. They've all been kind of together now. But you have modern day Karaites, such as the composer Abraham Kefeli, and they also have a YouTube channel which I check in. I watch it. I don't understand the language, so sometimes I watch it. But I think there are translations on the YouTubes. Fun fact about the Karaites from Egypt is they have a pretty close linkage to the ancient Israelites. So I thought that was pretty interesting to point out. Since I do genetic research, why not throw that into this video? So I hope y'all enjoyed this detailed look into the Karaites, the Krymchaks, and their history, and what I believe about them. I'm going to have another part talking about Karaites with my brother Rudy. So please check into that when that episode comes out. And until then, folks, hope you like, comment, subscribe. Stay blessed up, y'all. And until the next video, shalom.